Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Black Mirror and Philosophy, Dark Reflections. Edited by David Kyle Johnson. Series edited by William Irwin. Narrated by Joel Richards and Emily Beresford. Limit of liability, disclaimer of warranty. While the publisher and authors have used their best efforts in preparing this work, they make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this work and specifically disclaim all warranties, including without limitation any implied warranties or merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. No warranty may be created or extended by sales representatives, written sales materials, or promotional statements for this work. The fact that an organization, website, or product is referred to in this work as a citation and/or potential source of further information does not mean that the publisher and authors endorse the information or services the organization, website, or product may provide or recommendations it may make. This work is sold with the understanding that the publisher is not engaged in rendering professional services. The advice and strategies contained herein may not be suitable for your situation. You should consult with a specialist where appropriate. Further, listeners should be aware that websites listed in this work may have changed or disappeared between when this work was written and when it is heard. Neither the publisher nor authors shall be liable for any loss of profit or any other commercial damages, including but not limited to special, incidental, consequential, or other damages. The Black Mirror Multiverse. An editor's note. In an interview for IGN magazine, Black Mirror creator Charlie Brooker and executive producer Annabelle Jones told Joe Screbbles that the episodes of Black Mirror do not occur in one single universe. Instead, they occur in a multiverse. So, not only is each episode of Black Mirror a standalone story, it seems that each episode occurs in a standalone universe. That's not to say that there isn't overlap or influence between these universes. Indeed, you can find many online lists of Easter eggs which show there is overlap. Prime Minister Callow, from the national anthem, is a trending topic on Twitter right alongside #Death2 in Hated in the Nation. Crocodile reveals that one of the judges in 15 Million Merits was caught in a hotel room with a rent boy. The glyph in White Bear appears in White Christmas and Bandersnatch. Clearly, just like in Bandersnatch, where what we do on one path affects what happens on the other paths, what happens in one episode of Black Mirror can affect another. But, just like The Twilight Zone, which inspired Black Mirror, each episode is not part of one coherent story, placed in one universe. They are all separate. This, it seems, was the original plan, although Brooker changed his tune briefly after Season 4, and the Black Museum, in Black Museum, contain multiple artifacts from previous episodes, an ADI from Hated in the Nation, Daly's DNA replicator from USS Callister. The list is extensive. This, according to Brooker, strongly implied that the episodes shared the same universe. But after Bandersnatch, in the mentioned IGN interview, he recanted. Within Bandersnatch, there's many multiple realities going on at the same time. So we have a shared Black Mirror multiverse, is now what I'm saying, in which we can do whatever the bloody hell we feel like. Given the burdens of canon continuity, this was likely a wise move, although this kind of flip-flopping is why some philosophers don't want an author's intentions to dictate the meaning of their art. And if you want to believe and work out how Black Mirror is all placed in a single universe, you'll get no objection from me. But for the purposes of this book, the authors will be assuming that the episodes take place in separate universes. Not only does this track Brooker's intentions, it helps emphasize how each episode really is its own independent story. Introduction. Black Mirror, What Science Fiction Does Best. David Kyle Johnson with Leander P. Marquez and Sergio Oroña. Not everything that isn't true is a lie. Fionn Foxwell, The Entire History of You. Every time you touch the screen of your phone to make Netflix play an episode of Black Mirror, you see a reflection of yourself looking back. The title sequence, which begins with a small throbber rotating over a complete black background, turns the screen into a mirror. And that, of course, is the point. According to Charlie Brooker, the show's creator, the black mirror of the title is the one you'll find on every wall, on every desk, in the palm of every hand. The cold, shiny screen of a TV, a monitor, a smartphone. That's why the end of the title sequence actually makes it look like your screen is broken. When you watch Black Mirror, you're watching a dark reflection of society, one that is just slightly cracked, that depicts our flaws, our fears, and our possible future. Black Mirror is science fiction, but sometimes just barely. The show is famous for imagining advanced technology, for example, a common element of science fiction, but not every episode does. Indeed, the pilot episode, the national anthem, is set in the present day and features no technology that doesn't already exist, just television and social media. And, as we will later see, some of the advanced technologies in other episodes, like Nosedive's social ranking technology, were so barely beyond our current capabilities that they only remained fictional for a short time. As Brooker put it, Black Mirror is about the way we live now, and the way we might be living in 10 minutes' time if we're clumsy. Black Mirror is great science fiction because it's almost true. It unsettles us. It makes us wrestle with what technology might do to us, or with what we might do with future technology. As Brooker said, just as the Twilight Zone would talk about McCarthyism, we're going to talk about Apple. In doing so, Black Mirror serves a very important purpose. As famous American science fiction author Ben Bova points out, one vital role of science fiction is to show what kinds of future might result from certain kinds of human actions, like the development of certain technologies. Science fiction thus acts as an interpreter of science to humanity. In other words, Black Mirror is actually helping us prepare for and guard against the dangers that future technologies might pose. As such, Black Mirror is arguably the most important science fiction of our time. According to Brooker, however, this is not what Black Mirror is really about. Well, at least not always. Occasionally it's irritating when people miss the point of the show and think it's more po-faced, humorless, or disapproving than I think it is, or when they characterize it as a show warning about the dangers of technology. That slightly confuses and annoys me, because it's like saying Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 classic Psycho is a movie warning about the danger of silverware. Black Mirror is not really about that, except when it is just to fuck with people. Considering the tragic way most episodes turn out, you'd expect Brooker to be a technophobic Luddite, to avoid modern technology at all costs. But he doesn't. He, for example, loves his smartphone. For Brooker, what the show is really about is the human condition. It's not a technological problem we have, it's a human one. Our human frailties are maybe amplified by it, but in the end technology is just a tool, one that has allowed us to swipe around like an angry toddler. That said, Brooker himself apparently doesn't want to deliver a massive message to the audience or force opinions or thoughts or observations down people's throats. But when it comes to the series as a whole, Brooker seems to be right. While certain episodes, like The Entire History of You and Metalhead, could be legitimately interpreted as warnings about the dangers of the likely future technology they depict, most episodes are not. Archangel is not about the dangers of the Archangel monitoring device, but the dangers of overprotective parenting. Men Against Fire isn't about the dangers of the mass device, but about how we are already conditioned to see people unlike us as monsters. Ultimately, Black Mirror does what science fiction does best: philosophy. It's not just that Black Mirror tells stories that philosophers might find useful for demonstrating philosophical ideas, however, though it certainly does that. According to contemporary philosopher Thomas Wartenberg, for example, fictional media, like Black Mirror, can illustrate philosophical theories or serve as thought experiments, imaginary situations that philosophers often use to reveal our philosophical intuitions or refute philosophical theories using counterexamples. And that certainly counts as doing philosophy. Indeed, philosophers have been using counterexamples and thought experiments, much more far-fetched than any Black Mirror episode, for centuries. Black Mirror also does philosophy when it makes us wrestle with and consider how to guard against the possible dangers of advancing technology. As contemporary philosopher Daniel Danello says, "Science fiction serves as social criticism and popular philosophy when it takes us a step beyond escapist entertainment and imagines the problematic consequences brought about by these new technologies and the ethical, political, and existential questions they raise. It's philosophy when it invites us to understand the magnitude of the techno-totalitarian threat, so we might invent tactics for confronting it." But Black Mirror does even more. The show raises an array of philosophical questions, not just about technology, offers a broad range of social criticisms, and makes philosophical claims and arguments. Some critics, of course, might argue that a work of fiction like Black Mirror can't actually do philosophy in this way. Since Black Mirror is set in a fictional world, it cannot make the kind of explicit propositional claims that would be necessary. But this objection falls short when you consider episodes like the national anthem. "I know people. We love humiliation," says Jane, about the fact that her husband is being blackmailed to an indecent act on primetime television. "We can't not laugh." She's not talking about the fictional people of her world. She's talking about us. Indeed, the episode is so disturbing because we suspect that it depicts exactly how the public would react if such a blackmail request were made. Not everything that isn't true is a lie. What's more, philosophers have been using fiction to make philosophical arguments for centuries, often using what we would today call science fiction, long before science fiction was even a thing. The 2nd century Syrian philosopher Lucian of Samosata, for example, used his, ironically titled, fictional story, A True History, about travelers in a ship whisked away to the moon by an ocean whirlwind, to criticize the sophists and philosophers of his day. Islamic philosopher Ibn al-Nafis used his story, the Theologus Autodidactus, about a spontaneously created man, to argue that Islam was compatible with empirical observation. Both Thomas More and Francis Bacon used stories about fantastical utopian societies, respectively titled Utopia and The New Atlantis, to criticize English society, and Daniel Defoe used his work, The Consolidator, to criticize the politics and religion of his day. Like these philosophers, Black Mirror isn't making arguments as directly as many philosophers do today in books and journal articles, with clearly defined terms, stated premises, and logically derived conclusions. But they are not doing anything that different from what the renowned existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, 1905 to 1980, did when he wrote his play No Exit, to illustrate the idea that hell is other people. Of course, since its arguments are made indirectly, there can be debate about what point or question any episode of Black Mirror is making or raising. In the philosophical investigations, Ludwig Wittgenstein, 1889 to 1951, drew a distinction between seeing and seeing as. There is the physical or visual experience of seeing, and then there is its mental or cognitive aspect, whereby one interprets or understands what they see. When two people look at the ambiguous image that he made famous, they will see the same image, but could see it as two different things, a duck or a rabbit. And usually one cannot control what they see it as. In the same way, two people watching a Black Mirror episode will see the same thing. They will have the same visual experiences, unless perhaps they are watching Bandersnatch. But they may see it as something else. They may disagree, therefore, about what philosophical argument it is making or question it is raising, and that finally brings us to the purpose of this book. When we watch Black Mirror, we always feel as though it has a philosophical point. It's asking a question. It has a moral. But it's not always transparent. The chapters in this book will reflect how their authors understand or interpret Black Mirror philosophically, what they see it as. What question is it raising? What argument is it making? To do this, the book will begin by dedicating a chapter to each of the first 23 episodes, from the National Anthem to Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2, including a Choose Your Own Adventure chapter on the Choose Your Own Adventure episode Bandersnatch. You need not take the chapters in order. Just like each episode of Black Mirror, each chapter is self-contained. The book will conclude with 5 chapters that evaluate the entire series, and a short piece on whether we'll still be watching Black Mirror in the future. This may, as Frank put it in Hang the DJ, give you so many choices you end up not knowing which one you want. To help you decide, the title of each chapter clearly indicates the topic and articulates the question being raised. When does criminal punishment go too far? Could heaven be a place on earth? What are the consequences of trial by Twitter? You, of course, may see different questions being raised, and that's great. This book does not aim to give the final word on Black Mirror. Instead, the book is meant to spark philosophical thought, debate, and discussion of what is, arguably, the best science fiction show being made today. Season 1. 1. The National Anthem and Weighing Moral Obligations. Is it ever okay to F a pig? Brian J. Collins with Brandon Besh. So it's a statement. That's what this was all about, making a point. Alex Cairns, Home Secretary. The National Anthem, which was our first gaze into Black Mirror, was disturbing to say the least. Prime Minister Michael Callow awakens to discover that someone has kidnapped the beloved Princess Susanna and will kill her unless Callow has full unsimulated sex with a pig, live on national television. An attempt to capture the kidnapper as well as a plan to digitally simulate the sex act fail, and Callow ends up going through with it. To top it off, the kidnapper releases Susanna 30 minutes before the deadline. However, since everyone was at attention watching screens, as if they were all singing the same song, the national anthem, to see whether Callow would F a pig, no one noticed until the ordeal was over. It turns out the whole thing was orchestrated by Turner Prize-winning artist Carlton Bloom, who killed himself as the broadcast began, to make a statement about society's depravity. We're left wondering, is he the sick one for demanding such an act? Or are we, the viewers, the sick ones for staring at our screens and trying to watch it? More disturbing than the episode's depiction of bestiality is the fact that it depicts how we suspect society would respond if such a thing happened. Like Bloom, creator Charlie Brooker is making a statement about the depravity of society, but he's also raising a number of difficult philosophical questions. What is the nature of moral obligations, and how do we decide between them when they conflict? Would it be okay to do something that would otherwise be immoral, like having sex with a pig, to save someone's life? Could you bring yourself to do it? Could you forgive a loved one who did? Should you watch if it were broadcast? And why would Bloom, or Brooker for that matter, want to subject people to such shocking and horrific imagery in the first place? Weighing moral obligations. Moral obligations sometimes conflict with one another. Many situations, including the extreme one Callow faces, call for us to weigh different goods, values, interests against one another to determine what the right thing to do would be. Of course, we might ask about what we want to do or what we would do. But if we are interested in knowing what the right thing is, then we are asking what philosophers call a normative question. What should we do? This requires us to consider the morally relevant aspects of the situation and weigh them against one another. In the extreme case presented in The National Anthem, the primary moral considerations in play are 1. The personal interests of Callow and his family, 2. The personal interests of the princess and her family, 3. The public interests of the society and the royal family, and 4. The morality of bestiality. The question of weighing these types of moral considerations highlights a debate in ethical theory between consequentialists, deontologists, and virtue theorists. Consequentialism is the ethical view that the moral rightness of an action is to be judged solely on the consequences of that action. One simplistic consequentialist theory is hedonism, advocated by the Greek philosopher Epicurus, 341 to 270 BCE. Hedonism claims that pleasure is the only thing of intrinsic value, and that we should always choose the action that maximizes pleasure. Contrary to common belief, however, hedonism is not the pursuit of unadulterated physical pleasures. In fact, Epicurus led an extremely tame life of simple pleasures taken in moderation. Epicurus advocated protecting oneself from pain and procuring for oneself stable and meaningful relationships. From the Epicurean perspective, protecting his relationship with his wife should be a key component in Callow's ethical calculations. More complex consequentialist theories have been defended by canonical philosophers like Jeremy Bentham, 1748 to 1832, and John Stuart Mill, 1806 to 1873, as well as contemporary philosophers like Peter Singer and Julia Driver. Roughly put, according to the consequentialist, an action is judged on its consequences, and the right action is the one that has the best consequences and brings about the most good. Pleasure plus other things of value. A consequentialist would suggest that Callow should take into account all relevant factors and do whatever produces the most overall good. For example, Callow might go through with it because the pain caused to him and his wife is not as severe as the damage that would be caused to society and the princess by her death. In opposition to consequentialism is deontology, the view that rightness and wrongness do not depend on consequences, but instead depend on duty. A person doesn't need to know the consequences of lying, cheating, or killing to know they're wrong. The most famous deontologist, Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, argued that because one cannot will that everyone perform such actions, they cannot be universalized. Actions like lying, cheating, and killing are morally wrong. Kant also argued against treating others only as a means to an end. With this in mind, one might assume the deontologist would say Callow should not go through with it because effing a pig is intrinsically wrong. However, preventing someone's death when it's possible to do so seems to also be a duty we all have. One of the classic objections to Kant's theory is that it gives us no way to determine what we should do when duties conflict. Consequently, subsequent deontologists like W.D. Ross, 1877 to 1971, John Rawls, 1921 to 2002, and Honora O'Neill were much more moderate in their prescriptions. They suggest that when duties come into conflict, we should consider the moral weight of each. In this way, it might be morally permissible, or even required, to do something that ordinarily would be wrong. So, if saving the princess has greater moral weight than refraining from bestiality, the deontologist could prescribe doing the former, even though bestiality would still be intrinsically wrong. The third main contender, virtue theory, rejects both the consequence-focused and duty-based approach. The virtue theorist contends that the primary focus of ethics should not be actions. Rather, the focus should be on virtues and the moral character of the person performing the actions. Like its competitors, virtue theory comes in different variations, prescribed by the likes of Aristotle, circa 384 BCE to circa 322 BCE, G.E.M. Anscombe, 1919 to 2001, and Philippa Foot, 1920 to 2010. But essentially, the primary ethical concern of virtue ethics is acting on and developing moral virtues, like courage, generosity, and trustworthiness. Right actions are not the focus of ethical inquiry, but follow from having the right type of character. The virtuous person sees what to do, what the right action is, in situations with ethical implications. One of the common objections to virtue theory is that it does not answer the pressing moral question: what's the right thing to do in this or that situation? It simply suggests that you should develop a virtuous character within yourself so that, if faced with this or that situation, you will know what to do. In the situation facing Callow, the virtue theorist would say he should do what a morally virtuous person would do, but the theory wouldn't be specific about what that was. This, many would argue, isn't helpful. Often, however, the virtue theorist is satisfied to accept this complaint and redirect the discussion back to the virtues that people should be developing or to the type of action that a morally virtuous person would take in such a situation. With all this in mind, to understand these ethical theories better and maybe determine whether Callow did the right thing, let's look at how they are employed by different individuals and groups in the national anthem. The World's Bloody Broken. At the start of the episode, all the characters seem to be self-interested hedonists. Callow doesn't want to F a pig on live television. Page 1, that's not happening. He assumes it would ruin both his and his wife's life. Likewise, the royal family is self-interested. I trust you'll do everything in your power to get her back, the Queen tells Callow, implying that he should F the pig if that's what it takes to get Susanna back. Even the media is self-interested. Although the TV station UKN initially seems to take a Kantian approach by observing the Type 5D notice, because a woman's life is at stake here, to not cover the story, as soon as it's broadcast on American news networks, they dedicate every resource to it, presumably to preserve their ratings and revenue. The public seems to initially take a Kantian approach. A full 72% think that Callow should not be expected to engage in such an inherently immoral act, and that there would be no blood on Callow's hands if something were to happen to the princess because he refused. However, public opinion shifts when the kidnapper uploads a video of him seemingly cutting off the princess's finger. The video brings to mind the pain she would suffer being killed, and Callow's pending embarrassment pales in comparison. It'll be humiliating, but nothing compared to her suffering. After the video, 86% of the public think Callow should capitulate. Apparently, the public performs a utilitarian calculation. Interestingly, though, the public seems to be employing a bit of virtue theory, too. The kidnapper uploaded the video in response to discovering that Callow's administration was trying to fake the video. By seeming to risk the princess's life in favor of his own self-interest, Callow seems to be showing a lack of moral character. He's got to do what they want, Lauren, the nurse, says. We can easily get another prime minister, says another. We can't live without a princess. By putting his own self-interest ahead of Susanna's, Callow lacks the virtue a prime minister should have. At least, that was what the public seems to think. This doesn't stop him from being self-interested, however. When the attempt to capture the kidnapper fails, Callow only decides to go through with it after Home Secretary Cairns tells him that, if he doesn't, the physical safety of his family cannot be guaranteed. The mood will border on insurrection, and you will be destroyed. In one way, it pays off. His family remains alive, and he actually becomes more popular after the incident. In another way, very important to the hedonist, it does not pay off. Callow's wife can't seem to forgive him for what he did and how he handled it. His marriage is destroyed. Such unforeseen consequences bring to mind why it's difficult to justify any action on consequentialist grounds. It's impossible to know what the consequences of our actions will be. Recall, for example, that Susanna was released a half hour before the sex act even took place. Callow's act was therefore...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?